Yeah, I would say the lesson to draw from Scarface in terms of philanthropy is that there is always a power player behind the curtain. There's always a bigger power player. And if you're going to target an intervention, at some point, you have to set your sights on that big power player, right? Kind of like how Tony was worried about Frank, but he should have really been worried about Sosa.
Welcome to Career Cheat Code. In this podcast, you'll hear how everyday people impact the world through their careers. Learn about their journey, career hacks, and obstacles along the way. Whether you're already having the impact you want or are searching for it, this is the podcast for you. On today's episode, we have a Connecticut native who is dedicating his career to equitably improving the lives of people in his state. Let's start the week with Julian Pierce. Julian, welcome to the show.
Good evening. Good to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you taking the time to connect with us today. Let's dive right in, man. Let's tell the world what it is you do for a living.
All right. So my name is Julian Pierce. I'm the director for economic opportunity at an organization called Fairfield County Community Foundation, which is just that, a community foundation located in the southwestern corridor of the state of Connecticut. In my role, I focus on primarily affordable housing. That's my bread and butter. Homelessness, so moving individuals and families from homelessness to housing stability, which is another aspect of affordable housing. And a bit newer to my role is some work in adult workforce development as well as small business and entrepreneurship. So our foundation is hoping in the next 6 to 12 months to have some internal infrastructure and some strategy around how we could really foster an equitable and entrepreneurial ecosystem in Fairfield County, Connecticut.
Got it. Is that what you always wanted to do for a living?
Always wanted to do for a living is no is the short answer. I mean, when I was growing up, I thought I was going to be a football player. I was always a bigger kid. So I feel like a theme with us larger folks is that when you're younger, folks steer you to, physical athletics, and football lineman was that for me. As I got older, especially through high school, mind you, I was always just a little too big to play like Pop Warner and those, organized football when I was younger. So once I got to high school, I really had an opportunity to dive in, and I fell in love with it. So that's what I thought I was going to do when I quote unquote grew up. Also had a really deep interest in like psychology, how the human mind works. Really abnormal psychology. So I was always kind of attracted to, like, it sounds odd even saying it, but like serial killer documentaries and really, figuring out what made folks tick. I read the DSM when I was like a junior in high school, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for, psychological diagnoses. I think I came to like a crossroads, probably like my freshman year of college. I was coming off an MCL sprain, so I wasn't feeling as good as I typically did athletically. And I felt like I had to make a decision. Either I was going to rely on my body, for economic mobility, or I was going to rely on my mind. So I chose my mind. I started at the University of New Haven in West Haven, Connecticut, pursuing my degree in clinical psychology. And then I transferred to the University of Miami once I made that decision, either mind or body. But really, wanted to get to a space where I wasn't just in the typical flow that I was used to here in Connecticut, because I've been here my whole life. So I wanted to really try something different, apply it to Miami, LSU, Boston College, and I ended up landing at the U, and we could talk more about that if you want. But I think that's one of the best and most transformative decisions I've made in my life so far.
Absolutely. So tell me, where'd you grow up, and where were those expectations or were there expectations from any external people about you playing sports? Yeah. So where was that? Are you originally from Connecticut, or like where are you from?
Yeah. So I'm from a small town in Connecticut, Stratford. I guess maybe mid-size. I think maybe like 40 or 50,000 residents in Stratford. I'd been there. I was born and raised there, right? I was born in the neighboring city, Bridgeport, at Bridgeport Hospital, and raised in. And a combination of, my great grandma lived in Bridgeport, so spent a lot of time there. So Bridgeport's always been like a second home to me. But most of, my friends growing up, my immediate family, we were all in Stratford. I would say in terms of like external factors, in terms of, whether I do athletics or whether, I hone in more on like my academic skills and kind of the mental game, I would say I've always been reinforced to follow what my passions were, as long as it had the lens of giving back and reinvesting what I had in terms of my time and talents to bear, reinvesting that back in the community, especially the Black and brown community that I was always so proximate to.
Reinforced by who?
I would say, my grandma was a big reinforcer of that. She was a pastor. She just passed away this past September.
Sorry to hear that.
She's a pastor. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. She's a great woman, a great woman. But yeah, she was a pastor. So always, gave her life to God in the church, and really always had, anything that she had, she would give the shirt off her back, for someone. They could be a complete stranger, because that was just, the promise that she made to herself and the promise she made to God. Right. So I think, especially, being her first grandchild, and she had a lot of love to give, but also a lot of lessons to teach. Right. And I think one of the lessons that she always taught repeatedly was, we're not just here on earth for ourselves. There are things that we can do that the next man or woman can't necessarily do. And it's our role and responsibility to make sure that, and you can't change everyone's life. So I don't want to make it seem like she was like that. But when there are opportunities to give in a way where you can have true impact on somebody's lives, albeit small or big, then you should take the extra step and have the initiative to do that. And I think I brought that to definitely athletics. But I think once I got more and more ingrained in the professional life, I started to see that manifest in ways that made the lessons a bit more clear. Right. When you start doing things like our direct service, when you start talking about, the economic opportunity and mobility work that I do, you can start really seeing that from conceptualization to professionalization.
Got it. So you're in high school, you're an athlete, you are clearly set on, at that time, understanding your athleticism and understanding that you can probably get a scholarship or go somewhere and actually play, right? Was college always an option for you like that? And if so, tell me about your first stint as a student athlete.
And this will probably resonate with a lot of listeners, but when I was in high school, college was still being touted as more or less the only way, right? If you wanted to make it, if you wanted to do better than your parents did and all that good stuff, live the American dream, college was still priority numero uno. It was still the best mechanism for realizing that. As, time goes on, you learn like, oh, maybe I could have picked up a trade and maybe made a little more money. But I think in terms of, the fulfillment and my personal passions as they developed, it really almost ended up being random. I'd say in a lot of respects, how I ended up in this exact space, right? My goal was to be a student athlete, but like I said, I felt like I had a bum knee. I never really dove into it with the same, vigor and conviction, because there was a lot of self-doubt, So I would say that I made that decision rather quickly, that I would need to invest in my mind rather than my body, because if it's already tearing down at, 18, 19, then, what are my paths to really surviving in a capitalist society, right? And not just surviving, thriving, right? And how could I best position myself to do that? And when it came to how I was conditioned, it really, college was the path, right? In high school, we had AP courses. You could get college credits. We always had folks from UConn coming and talking to us about the great gifts of that college could provide you. When it came to, you put in all this hard work in high school, college is really fun too, right? That was always layered with, you're going to meet new friends, you're going to be able to socialize. So I would say it was pretty clear cut that I was going to be in a traditional education setting. It was just, what was I going to do? What was I going to focus on? And in terms of the extracurriculars, was I going to really balance what my personal passion in terms of athletics was with this overarching goal in the back of my mind of being a successful adult?
Absolutely. So tell me, what went into the thought process when you decided, if I'm going to stop playing football, I need to transfer, right? Because you could just not play football and stay in the same school. And what were the criteria in schools that you were looking at, like University of Miami, like LSU?
I would say transferring was more or less the perfect storm for me in terms of what was going on in my life that led to that decision. And it wasn't just all, I think I'd be doing it injustice if I said it was all about like space and setting and, being in that nice weather in Miami and being somewhere different. There were a lot of elements of college in Connecticut. I was also working. And one thing I left out, I was working full time overnight as a security guard at a hospital, right? So kind of my life flow at that point in time was I would work from midnight to 8 a.m. Maybe I'd be able to take a nap. Maybe I'd be able to go to the gym. I probably had class at 10 a.m. If I was lucky, I had class maybe right after. Maybe I got to drive home, have a little breakfast, and then have class at like an 8:39. But just that, I knew there was more for me as a young man with the talents and the strengths that I did have than just working, commuting to school, resting, and then working again, right? There was also a point in time in my academic life at my first school where, and I can remember this like it was yesterday. I went to, I forget what the term is in undergrad, where it's kind of like, it's like an advisor. It's like an academic advisor. And I pretty much asked, here are my goals. Here's what I'm thinking. In your professional opinion, like, I don't know if I was looking for mentorship. I think I was just looking for answers, like, Julian, you're thinking about this the right way. I can't solve all your problems for you, but here are some situations I've seen with similar students, and here's what they did. I was just looking for that. Like, let me know that I'm not I didn't think I was wasting my time, but let me know that I'm not so far off for what I think this experience could be. And what I got was very dry. It was very matter of fact. It was a conversation about credits. Like, well, what degree do you want to get? And here's what classes you need to take to get it, right? Just more of just like process. And it was cold, and I didn't feel like that life energy that I was sold in high school, right? This vibrant community of like-minded, of people who really prioritize education and academic advancement and socialization and camaraderie. It felt like I was just one cog in not even a cog, but an insignificant cog in a very, very big machine. Mm-hmm. And I know, as a kid, you get a lot of like wake up calls kind of similar to that. Like, all right, I'm one very small piece in this big matrix, but understanding that individual's position and what I was seeking and what I got, it more or less turned me off to the whole prospect of staying here because of what here used to mean to me and what it's growing to mean. And mm-hmm. I really feel now that if I didn't leave Connecticut at that point in time, then I would have left eventually and probably never come back, which is what I was really, really afraid of, not being able to come back and give to my community in a way that really I had felt I'd been preparing myself for, for all of my teenage and early adult life.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, so you're transferring, you're going to University of Miami. You're no longer working overnight. You're no longer playing football, so you don't have to report to practice or anything. So what does that mean for you socially? Are you involved in any other organizations or doing anything? And what does that look like? And then tell me about senior year. What are you thinking life is going to look like after graduation?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So first off, when I transferred there, I will say it's a culture shock. Miami, Florida, and New Haven, Connecticut are the antithesis of one another, really. I mean, a campus was more like the weather was nice every day, like people were happy, smiling, like it almost seemed like nobody was in class because everybody was out on campus hanging out. In terms of, what I was involved in, I did work on campus. So I fell right back into what I was good at, which was security. So I did work, for housing and residential life as a security guard part-time, a couple nights a week.
You're not filling any stereotypes as a big guy. That's just working security. I know. Not at all.
Listen, and what's funny, when my friends and I would like go to the bars when we were old enough, like I would consistently get asked like, where do you work? Blah, 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 because they were trying to hire me as a bouncer. Even as, someone in my late teens, early 20s, like, yeah, it was great. I kid you not. Like I had at least a half a dozen job offers, like at different bars and clubs to be a bouncer.
Right. And you're like, no, I just want to get drunk tonight, bro.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm here to have fun. I'm not here for a job offer. But it, it was, I think that did help, knowing that I always had a profession that I could fall back on. Right. And often I did, right. Even I, take little odd jobs, work in security if I need a little bit of money. And that really helped me get through school for the most part. But yeah, I worked security. So there was a good, I would say, network of folks that were a part of the housing and residential life department where we would, do team building activities and what have you. But I did also, join a fraternity. So I did the Greek life thing. That was an interesting, I'd say, journey in and of itself. Without getting into too many of the details, you learn a lot of stuff. I'd say in terms of relationships and quality of relationships, and how not everyone that you're in proximity to necessarily has the best interest of yours in mind, right? Even though you may bond over a set of shared things, if they aren't very, very core values, right? If things don't resonate with you and someone else on a core value level, like bringing like courage and humility and those types of things to a space, then I think you just have to be more active in offboarding those types of relationships. I think that's probably the most valuable lesson that I learned through probably Greek life at the University of Miami, right? Everybody thinks you're drinking, you're partying, girls. But I think, for me, I was always trying to draw something a little more from it, especially when I was in a place that was foreign to me, right? A new state, a new city, a new school. My whole social network was up here in Connecticut. So I was actively trying to build genuine bonds with my peers, but some folks just lean on their worst instincts when they're put in a pressure cooker like college. It really exposes who you're going to be as an adult. I really believe that, because a lot of the people I went to school with, I was like, yeah, I get it. Like you were just like that. You just didn't have the same amount of power and resource back then. But now, I could have guessed how you'd leverage that.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's a lot about humans. So tell me about what happens senior year. What is your declared major, and what do you think is going to happen after graduation?
A major in psychology, minor in sociology. So what I thought was going to happen was I was kind of like when I was at the University of New Haven. I thought I was going to be a licensed clinical social worker, and I thought I was going to help individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That's what I really thought I was going to be.
That's a very specific thought. Why?
Yeah. Because remember, that's how my mind worked naturally, with like the psychology, especially the abnormal part of it. So that was always the stuff in school where it's like, it was complex for a lot of people, but my mind just went there, right? It was easy. It was like, I had already read the DSM. I just had to focus on the updates while other kids were trying to just work their way through the pretext, right? It was like very complex psychological concepts were just, I explored those in my leisure. So I thought that if I was going to give back, that was not necessarily low hanging fruit, but it was natural. It felt natural to me. It was a groove that I had been in all my life. If I wasn't playing sports, I was, watching documentary or learning about why the brain does this and chemicals and all that type of stuff. I graduated with that thought in mind. And first of all, you need licensure to do that. So I had to think about what my best path to obtain licensure was. And also, to be really competitive in that particular job market, you need your master's. You need a master's degree. You're not going to do much with a bachelor's degree. So I went to school, ironically, back to UNH because they had a good master's program, and an exploration of kind of what track I wanted to go in the field of psychology. You could go on the clinical track, or you could go on what was called a community program development track, which was like institutional psychology, right? So how can you take an organization that's small, take it from good to great, or from non-existent to good? Or how can, program evaluation was huge. So it was kind of taking a little bit of what I already knew from my work in psychology, and taking some things that I knew about kind of the job market and how nonprofits work, and merging them. I learned just through exploring different, master trajectories, I learned that about myself, that maybe there's a way to kind of broaden my opportunities and not just shove myself in this one specific box. And also, I've grown up, folks, you hear that there's like a shortage of, Black male psychologists and psychiatrists and all that good stuff. So that was kind of some extrinsic motivations that I had. But also, I wanted to make myself as marketable generally as humanly possible.
That makes sense. Okay. So you're graduating, you're at the University of Miami. This is where your mind is. Are you proactively planning to move back to Connecticut, or at that point in time where you're like, this is actually pretty cool down here with like good weather and, folks that I could actually jive with for a while?
Yeah. And when I say this to people, they look at me like I'm crazy, right? But I honestly, the fact that I always felt like I was on vacation to some extent was kind of scary for me. Being in an environment like that where I almost had, other than financial, I had almost no stress was kind of spooky, right? It felt like I was living a life that was like extra. It was like, here's a few years where you can completely decompress. You could dive into your studies. You could create new friendships and relationships. But after this time is done, we have real work to do. And I think that was always in the back of my mind. So the question, that I always know that I was coming back to Connecticut. Yes, that was always a part of the plan. And at any point in time where it felt like, we could maybe do some things down here. Maybe we should stay here. I think just it caused more cognitive dissonance than anything. Like I didn't find comfort in the thought of staying. I felt comfort in the prospect of what I could give once I got back.
That makes sense. So you come back to Connecticut. What does your first job entail? What are you doing? Are you like super rich immediately after college? Because, we're told economic mobility is through college. So once we go to college, we're going to be well off. How's that play out?
Yeah, not like that. So it certainly didn't play out like that. So like a lot of folks, I get back and there's a realization that, and this was kind of indicative of the times, but it was the bachelor's, you probably heard like the bachelor's was the new high school diploma at that point.
That was a hot topic.
It was like I got my degree right on time for it to not be worth much, right? So I'm scrambling. I had a decent network in terms of like connections to nonprofits. And I knew what I had to bear that seemed to be most marketable, ironically, other than my degree, was that I could learn really fast and I could regurgitate information. So you give me something, let me digest it. Tomorrow I can pretend I'm an expert on it. So when in my search for a job, I was looking for things like in psychology, and this is before I went to get my master's. So I just have my bachelor's degree. So I'm looking for jobs that are looking for like not necessarily bachelor's required, but bachelor's encouraged, and that type of language where I'm just really trying to get my foot in the door and hopefully also make a little bit of money, maybe have some standard of living. But I was fine with, and still eating that good old American pie, right? I was still thinking like, this is just how it is. I just got to get my foot in the door somewhere and it'll work. I just got to show an institution that I'm a hard worker. I'm smart. I'm not just some college kid who thinks I deserve the world. Like, no, I'm really ready to hit the pavement and earn it. Right.
But as a psychology/sociology studied human, what door is it that you're looking for? Like what kind of, you said you want to get your foot in the door, but what kind of door are you envisioning though?
Yeah. Originally the door I was looking for was, an organization that was at least peripherally, doing some work that was like psychology adjacent, right? Like maybe a research institution, maybe perhaps like just a nonprofit that was serving a specific target population, maybe, homeless services, working with folks with high barriers, really anything, right? Anything that could translate. Group therapy, right? Maybe they're looking for a type of associate position, even like something like administrative, right? Just in the right setting. I was really, really open in that regard and thinking, and weighing the realities of what my degree could really do for me. And once again, it kept landing like it could get your foot in the door somewhere, but it can't necessarily get you all the way there. A lot of trial and error. I actually, the first real job I got was as a housing counselor. And the only part of that I knew about was the counseling piece, right? So I knew how to talk to people. I knew how to show empathy. I knew how to actively listen, right? All these kind of base level skills I had. What I didn't know anything about was the housing piece. And this was in the early, 2010. So there was still a lot of residual effects from the financial crash. While I was thinking, I'm going to learn, about finance, about credit. I'm going to learn how the banks work. What I really needed to learn was how to help someone financially whose life is literally about to crumble right in front of them because they're about to lose their home. So even as someone with a degree in psychology and sociology, when you're getting trained formally as a housing counselor, you do not get like trauma informed care training. You do not get the piece of that I think is so critical, because folks, it takes a lot of pride swallowing to come to someone and bear all your finance. Give me your 1040s, give me your bank statements, give me your pay stubs, right? It takes a lot of swallowing of pride for someone to do that. And also, you cannot betray someone's confidence in that situation. They're reliant on you to save their lives economically. And the reality of that role as a housing counselor is that it's not up to me. It's not up to them. It's up to the bank. It's up to the servicer. If the numbers don't add up, then that's where it ends. You can't talk to someone. You can't cry to someone. It's a very, very cold and calculated process. And unfortunately, I helped a lot of people save their homes, but some people you just can't. And when people think of foreclosure, they think of just traditional foreclosure, which is, I didn't pay my mortgage for X amount of months. The bank wants their money. If I don't give them their money, then they're going to take the house. But it's not always like that. Sometimes what you're in debt to, or whom you're in debt to, is the municipality, the city or town. We saw that a lot, where older individuals and families were getting what's called a reverse mortgage, where you don't really own the home anymore, but it's an affordable way for someone to age in place, right? Instead of paying the mortgage, you just pay the taxes on it. But then after that person passes away, that asset doesn't stay in the family. That asset goes back to the bank. So we had folks, behind on their taxes, and younger family members, concerned relatives come and say, hey, what can we do? Can we, we have the money. Is there a way for us to refinance this? Yada, yada, yada. And, a lot of times you're in a position of bearer of bad news.
Wow.
Which as a young professional, I think, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of trauma in that, how could there not be?
Yeah. Absolutely. A lot to learn as a young professional, a lot of lessons to take with you to move forward, not only in how you want to approach the work, what you would like to do as an intervention potentially for the work, and how to just work with people on a human level, right? That's a tough cross to bear when you're young in your career, and people dealing with real stuff, man. These are real issues that really affect people's lives.
Yeah. And you deal with, imposter syndrome too, right? Folks want you to help them buy their first home. I wasn't a homeowner. We want you to save their home. I know how to do it technically, but I don't have the lived expertise. Absolutely. Right? So there's a lot of, and there would be awkward moments where they're like, oh, when did you buy your first home? Knowing damn well, I look young now. So how young did I look a decade ago? They know I don't own a home. So it's people will test you in every space. But I think there it's you're right. They're right to an extent, right? You're right to doubt my skills and my abilities to help you, because it is so serious. A lot of times in philanthropy, we deal with things that don't have immediacy and aren't life or death, but being housed or unhoused, that could be a matter of life or death, right? So folks' lives are hanging in the balance, and you got this kid sitting in front of you, trying his best, knows his stuff. But yeah, I think that point in time really helped me put into perspective the nuance in perceived criticism, right? Because it can come from so many different places with so much different intentionality. But when the intention behind it is someone's life, right? It's like trying to just protect their life in a way that doesn't harm others, right? We're not talking about that type. So we're talking about, trying to protect them and their family and their opportunities to grow and thrive in such a challenging economy. I deserve to be scrutinized in this role, because it's critical to how your life looks after this.
Absolutely. So tell me, what happens after this? Did you decide you want to do this forever and that's what you're going to do, or where'd you go? No.
I mean, I probably after a few weeks, I knew that I couldn't do that forever, right? And it's so ironic. And we spoke earlier about how it felt so surreal when I was in Miami, because there was just stress was so few and far between, instances of stress. And then I come back and I'm right back into the thick of it, and probably one of the most stressful jobs I could think of, thinking back to even the security job, working in the hospital. You'd have incidents in the ER. You'd have to go to the psych units if there were combative patients, right? All types of crazy stuff. But this was a very different type of stress. There was a point in time, I think after 2 years, where I was skilled enough where I was keeping the option of staying in the field open, but transparently, there wasn't really an opportunity for economic mobility there or promotion, right? It was a pretty small shop, only a few different roles. And luckily I had a supervisor at the time that was pretty as transparent as I think she could be, in that, that if I was going to be promoted in some way, shape, or form, it would have to be something that was created, and likely created after a lot of thought from leadership. When what that said to me was, I'm going to have to play the waiting game for X amount of time. And I didn't know a lot, but I knew at the time that I couldn't just wait around for an answer that might ultimately not be the one that I'm looking for. So like most people do, I went on, Indeed, scroll looking for jobs, still realizing that, I at least should be a little more marketable now, right? I've got a couple years in the professional setting doing a variety of work, right? Not just things specific to mortgages or foreclosure, but also, financial literacy, credit, right? Perhaps I could work at a bank. Perhaps I could, do A, B, or C. But I saw a really unique opportunity to be what's called a program associate at the foundation that I work at now, Fairfield County Community Foundation. And it was a very, very, I think almost as entry level as philanthropy could be. It was really just, reading and evaluating grants, which was what my master's was in. At this point in time, I earned my master's through that 2 years that I worked as a housing counselor. So it was very transferable in terms of the skills, that I got from my master's program, but it didn't pay very much. That was like where I was conflicted. Paid very similar to what I was making, but it was a different opportunity. And it was an opportunity in a space that I think was very, very mysterious to me, which really attracted me. I think there are a few sectors that are really hard to learn about from the outside. And I think philanthropy qualifies for that. You really have to get immersed in the philanthropic sector to really, I think, understand what goes on behind the curtain. And I was in just, researching the role, researching kind of the institution, and researching the sector, that just became more and more clear to me. Like, at worst case scenario, I go to this place for a couple of years and I learn things that I never even considered learning about, right? And I really like program evaluation too. Even in my psychology background, it was like I loved the idea that there was always room for improvement, just as a concept. Even if you hit all your outcomes, all your outputs are where they should be, there are still opportunities to do even better, right? Just kind of institutional hope, right? We do this well, but we could do it even better. So I applied for the position, and I remember, one of the folks after I got hired by the foundation said, when we were interviewing you, it was less important to us that you had ever read a grant before, but what was important that your philosophy aligned with where we want to be as an institution. And I mean, 6 years later, I still think about that. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that has kept me here for this long, is that I always see myself as working to where philanthropy can be, not necessarily where it is in the status quo.
Wow. You feel like you're applying or have applied the knowledge that you learned in your grad school program. Is that a fair assessment? Because the program evaluation, program development portion of things, like, does that still play a role in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So my undergrad stuff, I will say not so much, right? Because it was it was clearly on a track to be a licensed clinical something. But in terms of my master's program, those skills are directly correlated to what I do as a program officer, the director of economic opportunity now. In terms of when an organization applies for grant, there are some very technical things that you need to be able to dissect, right? You need to know what a program design should look like. You need to know what the good version of audited financial statements look like. You need to know what good governance is like, right? All these things you can't just sit down and read and say, oh, that looks good, right? You do need those skills. over time, though, especially in a state as small as Connecticut, what is more important than your technical skills a lot of the time, I'll say two things: your ability to communicate and your ability to build relationships, which you don't necessarily learn in a classroom, right?
Absolutely.
There are some things that are intangible, and then some things, especially if you have good mentorship and good guidance, some things that you learn over time.
Did you have good mentorship and guidance?
I think that story is still to be written. I think so far so good, right? But I wouldn't say my mentorship has been so, like, the mentorship I've been received has been so explicit, and that it wasn't more than me maybe seeking out answers for very specific questions from folks that I admired or respected as professionals. So there's never been a time where, I've been able to check in with maybe someone regularly outside of my family or something, and really just, I'll pick your brain, you pick my brain, right? It's always been something, because I've always had this thing where, I don't want to waste someone's time, right? And it's probably the wrong way to think, but sometimes you could just get caught in chopping it up, especially if it's someone you admire and you want to, be like them as a professional or what have you. But yeah, there's always very pointed, like, hey, I dealt with this at work. How would you deal with it? Or this really made me upset. Am I wrong if I do A, B, and C, right? Just kind of vetting my thought process, really. But I think in terms of potential as a professional, I wouldn't be able to answer that completely comfortably without having a better line of sight of where this journey, right? My journey in philanthropy ends, if it ever does, right? Is this it? Is there something next? Right? Is it philanthropy? Is it philanthropy somewhere else? Is it a different institution? Is it a different field? Is this the ceiling of my skill set? And if it is not, what is? And is there some semblance of guidance or mentorship that might help me unlock that? And I think if I was to ever experience that going forward, that would be kind of the point in time where I was like, yeah, I believe. I believe in the power that someone can help you unlock within yourself vis-a-vis mentorship.
Got it. And it sounds like most of the folks that you consider mentors are people that you've worked with, just happen to be more experienced in the field. And you're like, okay, I can look to you for some advice when I'm encountering a situation that I feel like you probably did early in your career. Yeah. Okay. What doors do you think are open to you right now? If you were to decide, you know what, and I'm not advocating for this because I really like you in this role, but like if you were to say, you know what, I don't want to do this role anymore, what types of things would be open to you? Are they all in philanthropy? Are they all in nonprofits? Like what doors are open? And I say that, and I ask that because I think there are folks that are out here, maybe not necessarily, maybe they're really good at their job, maybe they're really good in their careers, but also want to understand what could be next. If I wanted to take my talents elsewhere, what could be next? So, and I think there's always value in knowing that, even if you don't make a move, even if you're like, no, this is the place for me and this is where my impact should be right now. There's value in understanding, well, where could I go?
And I thought about, and when you've been, I've been at my foundation for, it'll be 6 years in August. When you've been at one place for, I guess, about this long, a lot of times in the public space, someone asks you, so what's next? So what's next for you? So actually, over the last probably 12 to 18 months, I've thought about it a lot. And I think, it always goes back to three things. One, the first one is philanthropy, but in a higher leadership position, right? And somewhere where I can take kind of my personal philosophy, which I think is really, in summary, the closer you can get to giving the resources of philanthropy directly to the people that those resources have been built on the backs of, the closer you get to what I think philanthropy truly should be. That's one thing. I think a higher level of philanthropy could be in my future. The second thing is around financial institutions, and they've been the perpetrator of a lot of society's sins. But just like my curiosity about philanthropy, what a great thing to do to kind of not necessarily dismantle that, but inject real equity within the inside of that type of institution, of a financial institution. So I've thought about that. And a lot of big banks have like, Community Reinvestment Act obligations where they really have to do targeted investments in communities that were not given loans due to redlining, and like you mentioned earlier, and things of that nature. So that's really kind of the intersection of all of the experiences that I've had personally and professionally, I think. But then again, when I think about that, I think about how challenging it is in philanthropy when you have to deal with, white supremacist culture, right? Whatever that means to you, right? And how in the folks that I've spoken with, that is exacerbated tenfold when you start talking about a big bank or financial institution. So it's like, how much do you want to do? How much can you endure? And what would I do as a professional if it felt like I was going to work every day and hitting my head into a brick wall because I couldn't move this massive institution an inch? That's two. And then the third is nonprofit leadership, right? I think philanthropy I like because you can think big, you could think grand, you could think about innovation, you could think about, I get to think about the region as a whole, right? I get to think about things in a way that other more specific in the weeds types of work want to be conducive to, which is really good, I think, for like my mental health in a way in the work, right? Not having to really restrict my psychological freedom in my career, other than kind of focus area, right? Economic opportunity, that's my restriction, but that's a large universe, right? So I kind of thrive in that. But I also know that there are some organizations out here, the ones that we give our dollars to, that are making changes in people's lives that energize me, being one level removed from it. Right. So I think about, local community action agencies and how they have comprehensive programming that could span from early childhood education to, weatherization, to housing affordability, right, to counseling services and financial literacy. I think about organizations that focus on arts and culture, that is, bringing community together in ways that I think philanthropy are really starting to view as important and critical pieces to this whole kind to this whole kind of how do we solve the systemic inequities that are so pervasive in our society. So I those are the three areas that time and time again I'm like, I could probably do one of these three things, but I also feel like I'm from Fairfield County. It's my home. I don't necessarily think the last chapter has been written yet. And when I tell that to somebody, they say, yeah, but you could leave and come back. You're young. You got plenty of time on your in your career to circle back. But I also think, as philanthropy, we're in such a crucial moment in time where large institutions are thinking about things like guaranteed basic income and as of right housing, right? Not just as a commodity, but as a human right. Even 6 years ago, I'm hearing language like we're talking at my institution about white supremacy and how it pervades everything we do in terms of policy and practice, right? We've got board members who have benefit directly from white supremacy culture and systemic inequities, talking about those things, owning those types of things and realities, right? So I think that's a part of philanthropy's life cycle that I'm excited about and energizes me, and I'm not quite ready to leave until I see what might be able to come of it. And maybe it's nothing, maybe it's just a flash in the pan, or maybe philanthropy is actually about to start doing the right thing by and large.
Got it. I love it. Okay, tell me about what does a day or a week in your job look like? Like, what are you doing? You walk in on a Monday morning. You're like, all right, I got to get to work. What does that even look like? Yeah.
So on the front end, we're geographically located in Norwalk, Connecticut, which is a challenging commute generally on I-95 in southwestern Connecticut. For those listening, there's always traffic. You could be what should be 20 minutes away. It'll probably take you an hour to get there. So, there's always that. But luckily, one of the benefits, and you hate to say, but one of the benefits of the pandemic was that it's more palatable to meet remotely. So we're considered hybrid right now. There are times in the week that, for example, this afternoon I was up in Hartford. Sometimes I'm in Manhattan. Sometimes, but most of the time I'm in, the cities of Bridgeport, Stamford, Norwalk, and every now and then Danbury, which are the 4 cities in our county.
What are you doing when you go there?
So typically meeting with nonprofit leaders. The framing might be, or the context might be, the grant cycle. We have 2 competitive grant cycles per year, one in the fall, one in the spring. So it might be a site visit. It might be a preliminary conversation just to pick our brain. We released a new strategic plan over the winter. So we've had some inquiries from organizations that just want to learn about what we're all about under this new strategic plan, which is systems change for racial equity, which is huge. So site visits is one part of the job. And once again, they're year round. Sometimes the context is the grant cycle, sometimes not. A lot of meetings, right? Both internal and external. So in an average week, we convene as a community impact team, which is me and my peers. So we have a fund for women and girls at the foundation. So we have a small team that manages that. We have a Center for Nonprofit Excellence, which provides capacity building support to our nonprofit partners. We have an education and workforce development portfolio. So all those things kind of, form the community impact team, which is our primary external facing body of employees at the foundation. So we'll do a team meeting. I have a direct report that I share with our director for education and workforce development. So we'll check in with her, make sure everything's good, really focused on the grant cycle, any grants that we have pending. I will say, if I had to kind of split 30% this, 40% this, I would say I spend 30% of my time in internal meetings. I'd say I'd spend 40% of my time in external meetings. I'd say I spend 15% of my time doing administrative work, probably more like 20, and I spend the rest of that time moving around.
That's fair. Okay, so that makes sense to me, though, because I feel like, you're tasked with ultimately learning about organizations, building relationships, building the knowledge on what it is they do, figuring out if these organizations that make sense for your foundation to work with, right? And are these organizations that are trustworthy, that are doing what they say they do, and that are doing it effectively enough that we could put some dollars in their hands so they could advance that mission, right? In a way that aligns with your strategic vision of not only your organization, but your department, right? So there's a lot of thought that goes into disbursement of dollars and then figuring out what are the grant terms. What do we need from folks to actually make this a partnership that makes sense and that advances the mission. You've been there now 6 years or so. And I know you mentioned some of the things that make you excited about the industry real large, right? So, what keeps you motivated about going to work? After a long weekend like Memorial Day, what are you saying? You know what? I'm excited to go to work because X.
Yeah, and I can, today is a live example of, a meeting I was excited about, right? I went up to Hartford. Connecticut has 3 primary community foundations, like the big 3 largest. The biggest is the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. So I drove up to there for a conversation solely based on the prospect of a few of our institutions collaborating on guaranteed basic income. Trust-based philanthropy at its best. You put money directly in the hands of the people that need it most, and lo and behold, all the data says they flourish. They do better economically. They invest in themselves. They further their education. Maybe they buy a car, right? They do things to really improve their economic prospects. So I would say, in terms of that, it gets back to the point of the direction that philanthropy is going toward. When I first joined the foundation, it was still, we supported programs, right? Really focused on symptoms rather than systems, and not keying in on the root cause of the issues, which honestly, the more rooms I sit in, the more I hear that C word getting tossed around: capitalism, right? That more folks are kind of realizing that exists in a system that a few people do extraordinarily well, but the data that you see over time, even with very targeted interventions from philanthropy, folks by and large, especially folks in Black and brown communities, are not doing better today than they were doing yesterday.
Absolutely.
Period. And in a bevy of metrics: graduation rate, housing security, home ownership rate, you name it. Most of the metrics tell the same story, a story of deep, institutionalized, ingrained economic inequities that have not been historically solved by funding programs or innovating, right? Or supporting the next bright idea, right? It hasn't worked. But there's an organization called Up Together, who's, been working nationwide, that, has really been demonstrating in individual municipalities what the impact of a guaranteed basic income program can have in communities. So stuff like that, things that get me closer to what my personal philosophy is in philanthropy, right? Let's withdraw this endowment, find some low income census tracts, hand out the money. That's what I would do. That's why I'm not the CEO. But yeah, things like that. I think also in terms of kind of our partners keep me motivated as well. I can't stress enough how useless philanthropy would be if there weren't powerful, motivated nonprofits on the ground doing the hard work every day. What we come to bear is, we have the name of the institution. We have some semblance of convening power, right? We can convene folks that have held or perceived power, and we can provide financial resources. And every now and then we can roll up our sleeves and do some work alongside our nonprofit partners. But they have to do it every single day, right? The folks that we talk about that were 1 or 2 levels removed, folks that are low income, that are BIPOC, that are living the experiences of these issues like, housing instability and lack of opportunities for economic mobility. Those are the people that are really doing the hard work, I believe, in this whole matrix of what philanthropy is. So they keep me motivated. The prospect of doing more trust-based, community-led philanthropy keeps me motivated. And the fact that our institution over time has evolved. So it's not just like we explore these ideas and then go right back to what we were doing. Year over year, I think we get a little closer to that place where I think, we're doing right by the community with the goal of changing the system for racial equity.
I love that. I'm very big on, you don't have to choose between doing good and righteous work and making good money. So can you help folks understand a range of, if you are in this type of world and field and philanthropy with your type of experience for this many years, like, are folks looking at being broke forever, or like, are folks making decent money? What does that look like?
Yeah. So that's a very timely question. We have very good HR folks. So, we stay abreast of kind of what the salary ranges are for specific roles. I will say for philanthropy, it varies. It depends what you do in philanthropy. Typically higher level management, like let's say and especially like fundraisers, right? If your job is to bring in the money to the foundation, you make a little more money. My job, I do help bring resources into the foundation through the work that I do, but most of my job is getting money out of the door, getting it into the community.
Fair enough.
A program associate role right now, which is where I started, so 6 years ago, that more entry level philanthropic position is around 60,000 right now. You could predict. When I did the job, I was making 47.5. So just a little bit for inflation over the last 6 years. And that's really, it's a job seekers market right now. So for anybody listening, if you've been thinking about a career change, it is a job seekers market, and jobs are paying a little bit more because that's the only way that a lot of institutions can attract talent, is by bumping up those salaries. So go ahead and get in the market. In terms of, I went from associate to manager to director, so associate, manager, senior manager, director. So when I went from associate to manager, I went from like 47 to around 60. Manager to senior manager, 62 around, I don't remember exactly, but maybe like the 70s. But as a director, I won't tell you how much I make, but you can make 6 figures as a director.
That's great.
And, and you just get more into this. No one is a millionaire, right? Even our CEOs aren't making millions. But if you get into higher upper level management in a philanthropic institution, you could be looking at a healthy salary between, I'd say, 80,000 and 120,000, depending on, the endowment of your organization and what kind of rolls off of that endowment in terms of your operating budget year over year.
You're at a community foundation. What does that mean?
It really means that we're place-based. So we're ingrained in the community. We cover a very specific geography, but we're 501c3 tax exempt. So we give money to nonprofits, but we're also a nonprofit ourselves. We have committees that are comprised of community members. So for community impact, we have a community impact committee that is, some professional people, some people with legal expertise or banking expertise, but also folks that either touch nonprofits or have some nonprofit experience. And that's also, true for our board as well. So really, generally, for community focus, we target a very specific geography, and we have outcomes and collaborations that are specific to our geography, the 23 cities and towns in Fairfield County.
Got it. That makes sense. Are there any books, medias, like podcasts, shows, anything that you have read, digested, listened to, watched that have shaped you personally or professionally that you want to share with people?
Ooh, wow. That's a good question. So I'm big into sports. So I will say that most of what I consume is around sports. Recently, what I've been doing a lot is geopolitics, economics, stocks and trading, and I'll kind of just flash consume things in my free time. So I'll have to think about that question more in terms of the present tense, but the past tense, I'm a big Scarface fan. That's my favorite movie, is Scarface. So what lessons I've learned about philanthropy from Scarface is you never get high on your own supply. That's a joke.
I was muted, but I'm like, this is fascinating. If you're going to make a correlation between, okay, you want to play rough, to philanthropy, I'm here for it.
I could probably try it if you gave me a minute. Yeah, I would say the lesson to draw from Scarface in terms of philanthropy is that there is always a power player behind the curtain. There's always a bigger power player. And if you're going to target an intervention, at some point, you have to set your sights on that big power player, right? Kind of like how Tony was worried about Frank, but he should have really been worried about Sosa. So that's kind of my quick correlation I'd make between Scarface and
I cannot believe you did that. I'm fascinated. I was like, all right, you could probably make a correlation to how it helped you personally, but like, there's no way. You did the thing. That was impressive.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Got it. Is there anything else the world should know about you?
This journey has not been perfect. When I was born, and I was born to a single mother. I have a stepdad now that's been with me for since I was an infant. But when I was growing up, there was always kind of an underpinning of like rejection, right? Like why didn't my dad want to stick around? When he found out my mom was pregnant with me. I would say that I really think everything in life happens for a reason, and things that happen in your life that you can't necessarily explain or put logic to, if you can lean on the fact that you're secure in who you are today, regardless of the negative things that may have happened before you existed or while, I think that's really the secret sauce to getting through the hard time. And I mentioned, I lost my grandma in September. And she was young, she was in her early 70s, and just thinking, there are just so many more things that I would have liked to show her in terms of the man that I have been becoming, and eventually, will be hopefully the fullest, flourished version of myself. But also I find comfort in knowing that she at least saw the direction. She at least saw the path charted. And while she wasn't necessarily there waiting at the finish line, she could be comfortable in that I was heading towards one that was fully informed and influenced by the good that she put in the world. So that's kind of two ends of the spectrum, right? Something very, very negative, but then, even the negative stuff. I think if you, even like I was talking to a colleague earlier about his motivations, similar to a question you asked, and like what he brings to the work. And he said rage. He brings rage to the work because the conditions of society, especially for Black folks, especially for Black men, he says it makes him angry. It boils inside of him when he's at meetings and he hears certain things. But what he's learned through his life is that he can take that rage and he can channel it to being productive. And I think that resonated with me a lot. The stuff with my biological father, that made me mad. And I think that's a part of what made me good at sports, is because when I was out there, I was mad, and and now I could show you just how mad I was by imposing my will on you. But I think as I've gotten older, mellowed out a lot, I think there is a level of productivity that you can draw from a sense of rage at the system, right? Rage at capitalism, rage at conditions which some of us are forced to live under by choice, by political choice, right? And I think, not necessarily that philanthropy is a perfect tool to express that, but I do think it's one. And I think it's one that if you're able to kind of endure the reality that you're not going to snap your fingers and change the things that make you mad, right? That change the things that incite rage within you, I think you can find a level of incremental success and societal change that could at least maybe satiate that in the short term. It's forever work, right? It's not, you don't get into philanthropy and change the paradigms of society, but you do hopefully grease the gears that eventually will.
I love that. I'm glad your grandma got to see some of the early indicators, and you are certainly making a large impact in the world. So I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and believe on the mission we're on, please like, rate, and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're using, and share this podcast with your friends in your networks. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Career Cheat Code, and tell us people or careers you would like to see highlighted. See you next week with some more cheat codes. Peace.